After countless centuries of oppression, queer folks in the United States had had enough and kicked off the gay liberation movement. We've now arrived in the 1970s when all that pent-up sexual repression exploded into one hell of a party. This was the free love era. Harvey Milk won a seat on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors and introduced a gay rights ordinance protecting gays and lesbians from being fired from their jobs. Milk also led a successful campaign against Proposition 6, an initiative that kept homosexual people from working as teachers.
That is the tip of the iceberg.
Milk famously urged queer folks to come out and be themselves publicly. He believed that this would be better for them and better for society, as people would begin to see how many of their wonderful friends and neighbors were queer. Then straight folks would become allies and help to dismantle homophobic systems, breaking that vicious cycle of homophobia that had kept queer folks straitjacketed and in the shadows.
Most importantly, every gay person must come out. You must tell your immediate family. You must tell your friends, if indeed they are your friends, once they realize that we are indeed their children and we are indeed everywhere. Every myth, every lie will be destroyed once and for all. Once you do, you will feel so much better.
And then Milk was assassinated, along with the mayor of San Francisco in 1978. The positive momentum and optimism were short-lived.
For the first time, gays were saying they were proud they were gay. Things were getting better for homosexuals, until AIDS.
In 1981, rumors of a gay cancer began to circulate.
The lifestyle of some male homosexuals has triggered an epidemic of a rare form of cancer.
Do we know for certain what causes it?
No. There are a lot of theories, but at this point, we know nothing for certain.
Now, if we don't know how to cure it, it must be spreading like wildfire.
Yes, they're growing at an exponential rate.
Victims of the disease say the government has done nothing and has no plan to.
It is the gay community devastated by this disease that knows the most about AIDS.
Hundreds and then thousands of people died of AIDS, tragically bringing the public's attention to the LGBTQ community and especially to gay men in a new way.
All over the country, homosexuals are reporting increased discrimination.
And it's the concern about AIDS that has triggered a wave of homophobia in this country. The fear of homosexuals can be found from Maine to California.
I remember this time from my childhood. I recall hearing from some people that AIDS was God's punishment for sin.
All this media attention and sympathy for these AIDS victims just really bothers me. The vast majority of its victims are a group of abnormal people.
From other people, I heard that it was just a terrible disease that was killing women and children and straight people too. And I remember campaigns to get people to donate to research.
This is not a political issue. This is a health issue. This is not a gay issue. This is a human issue.
You are raising the possibility that people are dismissing it because it strikes mostly the gay community?
There is no question in my mind. If this were happening to you and the white, straight, middle-class community, it would have been attended to a long time ago.
More than anything, I remember thinking, wow, there are a lot more gay people in the world than I realized. In the 80s and 90s, the queer community was reeling from the AIDS epidemic, and activism shifted somewhat from liberation to assimilation. And fascinatingly, the movement took on the goal to be accepted by two of the world's most conservative patriarchal institutions, the military and marriage.
The debate over whether to lift the ban on homosexuals in the military has, to put it mildly, sparked a great deal of interest over the last few days. Should someone be able to serve their country if they say they are homosexuals?
After a lot of debate, in 1998, President Bill Clinton passed the infamous "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" policy. This compromise seemed like a step forward, and honestly, it might have been the biggest baby step that was possible at the time. But just think about what that policy, mandating that people stay in the closet, would do to a queer person.
Why is it that you have to come out? I mean, why is it that you have to drag this into the workplace, and why can't you keep your private life private? And I was telling him, I said, sir, you can't keep your private life private. Nobody does. And I said, you're wearing a wedding ring on your hand, and you have a picture of your wife behind you, your desk here. I said, nobody keeps their private lives completely private. And what you're asking me to do is consistently, consciously lie. Not just not to put the picture on my desk, but to consciously and consistently lie to you and to all my coworkers about what I do on the weekends and about who I care about and who I choose to spend my life with. That's what you're asking me to do.
That's a powerful point. Straight people are free to display photos of their spouses. It's seen as totally natural and politically neutral. But when a person displays a photo of a same-sex spouse, suddenly that's a political act. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In the 1990s, there was no such thing legally as a same-sex spouse. Which brings us to the battle for marriage rights. This was a long, complicated path. So let's boil it down to 3 steps that led to same-sex couples winning the right to marry. Step 1, the great back and forth. As I said, in the 1990s, only straight couples were allowed to get married. Well, unless you lived in Hawaii. In 1991, 6 same-sex couples sued the state for marriage rights, and the Hawaiian Supreme Court ruled in their favor, saying that denying marriage rights was unconstitutional. Interestingly, prior to colonization, Native Hawaiian culture allowed for same-sex partnerships. Same-sex marriage became legal in Hawaii. This created a huge hullabaloo. I remember it. The LDS Church got really scared that same-sex marriage in Hawaii would have to be recognized in Utah. They mobilized opposition, bringing in their buddy, the Catholic Church, and religious conservatives pressured Bill Clinton to sign the Defense of Marriage Act, which created a federal law that defined marriage as only between a man and a woman. This meant that states could legally prevent same-sex couples from marrying. By 1998, Hawaii passed a constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage. This back and forth defined the whole era, with dramatically opposed forces yanking state and federal laws in a game of tug-of-war, which, remember, was not a game, but people's actual lives. Step 2, anti-sodomy laws are overturned. Remember the anti-sodomy laws that we talked about in our previous episode? Illinois was the first to strike them down in 1961, and then a lot of other states followed suit in the 1970s and 80s. But after decades, there were still 14 holdouts where homosexual activity between consenting adults was illegal. But then, in the Supreme Court case Lawrence versus Texas, Justice Anthony Kennedy, a conservative, cited the 14th Amendment and argued that homosexual persons have a right to privacy in their own homes. All sodomy laws were overturned in 2003. Conservative Justice Antonin Scalia said at the time that this ruling would break the dam and gay rights would flow throughout the land. And he was right. Other states were emboldened to legalize same-sex marriage, and Massachusetts was followed by Connecticut, then Iowa, and so on. Imagine what this felt like for couples who had spent their lives together and had been waiting for this day for so long. But then, just like in Hawaii years before, there came the backlash.
The big battle here, and a battle that's too close to call, is over the future of same-sex marriage.
We have the right to define marriage. It's in our Judeo-Christian heritage, and it's the right thing to do to vote yes on Prop 8.
So important to maintain marriage as God intended from the very beginning of time.
Homosexual relationships, it's unnatural.
This is not an equality issue. This is not a civil rights issue. You're born male or female. There's no such thing as a gay gene. It doesn't exist.
If I look at my computer, I still have some emails saved from 2008 with family members and some of my closest friends ranting about how same-sex marriage was going to bring about the downfall of civilization. We were living in California and Proposition 8 was on the ballot. This was a proposition to ban same-sex marriage.
Crowds continued to target the Mormon Church, which poured millions into promoting the same-sex marriage ban.
It's a heated debate that is only expected to get hotter.
I wrote an essay about that experience. You can find the link to the essay in the description. It's very, very vulnerable for me, but I learned a lot, so I decided to share it. Number 3. Overturning anti-LGBTQ legislation. Remember Don't Ask, Don't Tell? In 2011, Congress repealed that law, allowing LGBTQ service members to serve the country they love without having to hide the people they love.
I am proud to sign a law that will bring an end to Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Next, the 2013 Supreme Court case, the U.S. versus Windsor.
Arguments over whether the Defense of Marriage Act, or so-called DOMA Act, violates the Constitution.
What are we, half married? Are our children half children? What is this? We're either married or we're not.
Again, Justice Anthony Kennedy, this guy's a conservative judge, spoke up for the constitutional rights of queer Americans, and the court struck down the Defense of Marriage Act. This paved the way for a moment that many of you watching probably remember. On June 25th, 2015, the Supreme Court ruled that same-sex couples had the right to marry in every state of the country.
Today is the first time same-sex couples across the country can be married in every single state.
Have you ever wondered what that case was about? Jim Obergefell and John Arthur had been a committed couple for decades and were finally able to marry in Maryland in 2013. Tragically, John died of ALS in Ohio, and the state of Ohio wouldn't allow Jim to put his name on the death certificate as his spouse. Jim took the case to the Supreme Court, and this case highlighted the fact that this piecemeal approach of state-by-state legislation wasn't working.
I'm here today in front of our nation's highest court because my home state fought the recognition of my marriage to John. I love you. This is for you, John.
And here I'm going to read an excerpt from what Justice Kennedy wrote in the case. The centrality of marriage to the human condition makes it unsurprising that the institution has existed for millennia and across civilizations. Since the dawn of history, marriage has transformed strangers into relatives, binding families and societies together. Far from seeking to devalue marriage, the petitioners seek it for themselves because of their respect and need for its privileges and responsibilities. And their immutable nature dictates that same-sex marriage is their only real path to this profound commitment. Next, Kennedy detailed the struggle of the LGBTQ community to fight discrimination. He wrote, "The nature of injustice is that we may not always see it in our own times. The generations that wrote and ratified the Bill of Rights and the 14th Amendment did not presume to know the extent of freedom in all of its dimensions, and so they entrusted to future generations a charter protecting the rights of all persons to enjoy liberty as we learn its meaning. By virtue of their exclusion from the institution of marriage, same-sex couples were denied the constellation of benefits that the states have linked to marriage. This harm results in more than just material burdens. Same-sex couples are consigned to an instability that many opposite-sex couples would deem intolerable in their own lives. These considerations lead to the conclusion that the right to marry is a fundamental right inherent in the liberty of the person, and under the due process and equal protection clauses of the 14th Amendment, couples of the same sex may not be deprived of that right and that liberty. The court now holds that same-sex couples may exercise the fundamental right to marry in all states."
Today, the court stood by a principle in this nation that we do not tolerate laws that disadvantage people because of who they are.
To all my dear LGBTQ friends and family members, I'm so sorry that we as a society got this so wrong for so long. I'm so sorry for the harm it caused. I love you. It's been really amazing to see that within the span of a decade, marriage equality went from being so controversial to being overwhelmingly accepted. A 2022 Gallup poll revealed that support for marriage equality was at 71%, and in Utah, it's 75%. How did this happen? One reason is contact theory, a political science theory that pervasive familiarity and exposure to actual people changes hearts and minds. Queer people are born equally into liberal and conservative communities, and people are increasingly out now, so no one can say anymore that they don't know anyone who's queer. The vision of Harvey Milk and other activists is being fulfilled in front of our eyes, and new cultural norms are being established.
If we learn from history that the struggle goes on, eventually we will win.
This leads to the next factor, which is generational shift. Millennials, Gen Z, and now Gen Alpha view marriage equality as a non-issue and a given. Another reason support has grown is that all these hysterical claims in my email inbox turned out to be false. Our gay friends getting married did not bring about the unraveling of society's moral fabric. With all that said, as my friend Matthew says, marriage equality is an assimilationist victory. Gay folks said, "We just want to be like you," and the government finally relented. It's not straightforward to translate this victory to other struggles like transgender rights. Trans rights are probably one of the most hotly debated topics in the cultural discourse right now.
Trans women are women. That is their gender.
I'm thoroughly confused.
If you're interested in digging into the nitty-gritty, keep an ear out for a podcast episode on breaking down patriarchy this June, when our podcast editor, Sam Rose Preminger, will be answering all of the tricky questions. In the meantime, how do you see these debates now that you have more historical context? What did you learn that you didn't know before? And what questions do you still have? Tell me in the comments, and then make sure to like, subscribe, and pass this episode along to a friend.